Good evening. You're listening to Adrenaline Radio, 1680 on your AM dial. My name is Fred Blanchard. I'm your host for Adrenaline Motorsports. The other things I'd like to discuss here today really is in the areas of our sponsors. I know that we have the Arias Piston Company, who's been very gracious to be one of our sponsors, and the gentleman I'm going to talk about is Mr. Arias himself, and he was very much involved with the wanting to know things, and along with his forte when he first started out in the early days, he was pretty much a tune-up mechanic for some of the Chevrolet agencies, and he was very innovative in finding that when there was an engine that was taken out of a car, he offered to buy it and take it home and take it apart and salvage what he could out of that particular engine, and then started accumulating parts of this kind, and then he started going around to the different dealerships, and all Chevy dealerships, of course, and maybe some Cadillac dealerships, but these were the things that he did at early stages of his life as far as fooling around with hot rod engines, and but he actually started out working for Wayne Manufacturing. Wayne in those days was a manufacturer of cylinder heads for inline six-cylinder Chevys. And again, I go back to the 12-port head that Wayne was a big manufacturer of 12-port cylinder heads. And Nick Arias worked for this company. He was learning the ropes. He worked on some of the machine tools there and drilling holes, and later on, he started learning about cylinder head porting and talking to the owner of the company. And next thing you know, the supplier of pistons to Wayne Manufacturing was a gentleman by the name of Frank Vanolia, and he wasn't really a manufacturer of pistons per se for the marketplace, but he did make pistons that were cast pistons for Wayne Manufacturing. And Wayne was making marine engines at that time out of cast iron and using Frank Vanolia pistons. And as time progressed, Mr. Vanolia wanted to sell the business, but he didn't think much of the young men working in the shop. But a couple of the gentlemen there, these young men, got together and talked to the owner and asked that he would make the purchase in their behalf, unbeknownst to Mr. Frank Vanolia, and so the transaction was completed, and that started Vanolia Pistons on a very extreme small scale, and they went out and looked for work, and one of the first investments they made was to invest in what's called a die for forging pistons. The different process, of course, from casting the pistons. It takes a heated form of aluminum and forces it into a mold, and it hits it like a hammer. And when the hammer, there's two pieces of the die, a male and female. And so the male forces the aluminum into the female part of the die, and when it's released, you have a forged billet, so to speak. And that's the beginnings of how you make a forged piston. That's just the beginning. You then have to take it and qualify it, which means you have to make a provision for the bottom of the piston where the pin goes to attach it to a machine tool so you can do the finite machining, such as ring grooves for the various rings. Most of the pistons that are sold today use 3 rings. Some exotic engines do not, but for the most of the engines use a 3-ring groove. Various thicknesses of rings. They've gone into the various exotic alloys. Sometimes you'll find stainless. You'll find a moly piston, or a moly ring, rather, a ductile moly ring. But this is what Arias got himself involved with, and he was a very creative guy, found sources for the rings, and began with partners, of course, over the period of time. And he was in and out of partnerships with various gentlemen, but still involved with the Vanolia piston. Then he went back to work and got out of the company, and then he went back into the company again, and then he finally decided that this is what he wanted to do, and they formed a partnership with a fellow by the name of Bob Torres, who's no longer with us, and another gentleman by the name of Joe Paisano, which is also no longer with us. And then they formulated as a corporation Venolia Pistons, and I think its first location was down there in Long Beach, if I'm not mistaken, on 15th Street, and that's what they started the piston company there, and they invested in, again, as I said, a forging die, and started making forgings along with cast pistons. And as the engines got more demanding for stronger parts, and both Joe Paisano and Nick Arias were very familiar with the racing market because they attended a lot of the events, not only at Bonneville and the Dry Lakes, but also at the drag races. So they started going around and promoting their product, and it took off. It did very, very well, and the piston company took off, and then in later years there was a parting of the ways of partners, and Nick Arias decided to go into business for himself in 1969, and it was a very difficult decision to make. The business was very tough in those days, and he was very fortunate to have been associated with a gentleman by the name of Louis Center of Anson Automotive, which Lou Center was very big entrepreneur in performance wheels. He was making connecting rods. He was making pistons. He had quite a retail operation, and he was a manufacturer as well. Some of the concept that Lou Center created pretty much are in play today in the areas of wheels and in manufacturing and what have you. But Nick Arias and Lou Center kind of got together, and Nick Arias basically decided that he would make an offer to Lou Center for his piston side of the business. And it was a tough decision, and it was difficult for Lou Center to part with it, but the result was that Nick Arias was now in the piston business, and had a very first customer was Anson Automotive, which was Lou Center, of course. And the piston company then took off, and he moved forward with that and acquired a spot on Normandy Avenue. And it was a large complex, but he only was able to afford one section of it. But he went into manufacturing of his first products there. And during that process in '69, he decided that pistons were very cool, and this is what he wanted to do, but he had interests elsewhere. He decided that he wanted to be involved in performance engines as well. And he rented a building across the street from his location, where he's still at today at 134th and Normandy. And he created a pattern manufacturing facility. What patterns are used for is to cast aluminum products in most cases, and he's done quite well with that. And his son at that time was a young man, and he got him where he was in training, so to speak, with another gentleman by the name of Tom Roberts. Currently today, Tom Roberts is what's called Tom Roberts Design, and has moved forward, and he's been very instrumental in a lot of engine designs from that time. But at those days, Tom was kind of in the employ of various industries, along with Nick Arias III, which was Nick's son. And from that facility came the first cylinder head for the Chevrolet Big Block Chevy. And having a cylinder head design, when I say the big problem with the drag racing in those days was it was pretty hard to beat the design of a Chrysler engine, which had a hemispherical design combustion chamber, and a lot of the Chevy racers just couldn't compete. And Nick Arias heard all the complaining about many who couldn't compete, and the result was he decided to take it upon himself to design a cylinder head for the Big Block Chevrolet, but the design of it was going to be a hemispherical design combustion chamber as well. And he proceeded not only to design the cylinder head, the rocker arm assemblies, the valve covers, the intake manifold, all of the things you needed to have, because nothing out there in the market at that time would apply to what he designed as a cylinder head. And